Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. I wanted to talk a little bit about which probably was the game of the weekend on Sunday between the Villanova Wildcats and the Texas Longhorns. And I just wanted to start off by saying it was obviously super disappointing that we did not end up getting Gonzaga and Baylor on Saturday as the game was canceled due to COVID. And hopefully those two teams are actually going to end up playing this season. But at the same time, it was a possible 1 versus 2 matchup. It would have been a matchup that many different people would have loved to see. So at the same time, super unfortunate, but hopefully it will happen soon. But anyways, with that game being canceled, that really set the stage for Villanova and Texas on Sunday. And I was actually really impressed with both teams in this game. And if you listen to my show on Friday, I actually did a whole segment talking about the Texas Longhorns and just how improved they were compared to last season, just how much better the effort was. And even though the Texas Longhorns ended up losing this game to Villanova, and I do believe if you are a Texas fan, there are some reasons to be a little bit upset. I do believe this was a game you easily could have won. But I think if you look at this from the big picture perspective, if you are a fan of the Texas Longhorns, you're going to say, look, we just won 3 games in 3 days against 3 pretty good teams in Davidson, Indiana, and North Carolina. And then we just really competed hard with the Villanova Wildcats. When you compare that to everything the Texas Longhorn basketball fan has been through for the last couple of years, I think they're going to sign for that immediately. And I said it on Friday, this is a really good chance for Shaka Smart to silence a lot of critics like myself, a guy that even going into the season was not particularly high on Texas, knowing how much talent they brought back, just because it was clear to me that Shaka Smart just was not the answer, and he was not the guy to get the job done. But at the same time, I wanted to talk a little bit about this game from the Villanova perspective because, once again, I think Texas deserves a lot of credit. They are a top 10 team, in my opinion. I actually have them ranked number 7 in my top 25. They're a really good basketball team, and right now, they could be the biggest threat in the Big 12 to Baylor. I think that is a perfectly reasonable statement to make. But talking about Villanova, man, I was so impressed with the way they were able to get this win. And I totally understand. There were a lot of people that were really freaking out after Villanova took that loss to Virginia Tech in Bubbleville. But at the same time, I was not one of them. Because, number one, Villanova, I watched them play against Arizona State. That was a great game. And that was a high-level basketball game. And Jay Wright just continued to feed Jeremiah Robinson Earl. And ultimately, it ended up being the right move because that guy was just unstoppable. Villanova ended up winning the game. And watching Villanova in that game against Arizona State, it kind of told me, like, look, that was a really nice win. But I think these guys want to get out of Bubbleville as soon as possible. And that's because of the fact that the game against Arizona State was just really tiring. And when Villanova played against Virginia Tech, I'm not going to sit here and say that I predicted Virginia Tech to win, but at the same time, it's not the most shocking result we've seen so far. Just because Villanova was literally just sitting around there the whole day and Jay Wright just decided to add another game. Villanova obviously didn't seem that motivated to play. The game went to overtime, and Virginia Tech ultimately ended up getting the job done. It's a fluke loss. It happens, whatever. And I did get a little bit of criticism for not only last week putting Villanova at number 11 in my top 25. There were a lot of people that thought I should have had them way, way lower. But at the same time, I'm going to put them back at number 3 after this win against Texas. Because I'll tell you what, I don't know if there is a team maybe outside of Gonzaga. So I think it's pretty obvious. In whatever order, Baylor, Gonzaga, Baylor 1, 2. I'm not going to fault you there. But at the same time, I think number 3 right now is super wide open. And I do think that the NCAA AP Top 25 putting Iowa there, I'm not calling it the wrong call, but it's not the call I would have made just because I haven't seen Iowa play against a legitimately good team yet. And we'll see how they do on Tuesday night in the ACC Big Ten Challenge against North Carolina. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I just think that Villanova, they had the win over Arizona State. They have the win now over Texas on the road. And I think they deserve a lot of credit. And their two sophomores were really why they were able to win this game on Sunday, because early in the first half, Colin Gillespie, if you watch Villanova, you definitely know him. He is the prototypical Villanova point guard, right? He is a guy that started as a freshman and was a reserve, like the 8th or ninth man on that national championship team a couple years ago, the second one with your Dante DiVincenzo's and your Mikal Bridges and your Jalen Brunsons. And that was his freshman year, and now all of a sudden he's a senior, and he has a legitimately big-time role within this Villanova offense. And his jump made from his sophomore year to his junior year was incredible. I don't know what exactly happened, but he turned himself into a legitimately good offensive player, and Villanova needed him on Sunday, but unfortunately, he got into a little bit of foul trouble within the first half, and he wasn't the main reason why Villanova got the job done against Texas. Now, Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, who was phenomenal, he had 8 rebounds and continued to show versatility inside, outside, an impressive mid-range game, and he's going to be talked about all season as one of the best players in college basketball. And right now, I can really only find 2 areas of his game where he needs improvement. First, despite adding a consistent 18-foot jumper, he still can't stretch it out to the three-point line. I think that is going to be one area of his game where he could really improve in, and at the same time, the turnovers can happen a little bit too much sometimes, but even that's improved from where it was last season, and at this point, I feel like if you're a Villanova fan, you're just being picky because the kid is a stud, and he'll likely make the jump to the NBA after this season. And also Justin Moore, and he was phenomenal during this game, and he really led the scoring for Villanova in the first half. On the day, he shot 80% from inside the arc, 50% from 3, and 83% from the free throw line. We will have nights all year long where Justin Moore is required to be the team's top scoring threat, and he's shown time and time again that he's up to the challenge and he's ready to do that. And the amount of timely shots he was able to hit in this game against Texas, super impressive. But beyond that, he's proving to be a tough defender and a really good rebounding guard, and I feel like he could be a guy that could be a sneak NBA player sooner rather than later. And looking at some other thoughts for Villanova after this game, I feel like that Jay Wright did a really nice job with his bench. Brandon Slater and Eric Dixon didn't show the same execution as they did against Hartford, but they played solid minutes and both contributed in this game. It's not always easy to do that on a team like Villanova where, let's face it, one of their biggest strengths is depth, and I totally understand if you're a Villanova fan, it is very disappointing not to have Brian Antoine on the squad anymore. I'm not exactly sure when he's expected to be back. He is just having a really hard time staying healthy over the last couple of years. And I was really impressed with what not only Moore and Robinson-Earl were able to do, but Slater and Dixon provided a role. And you know, when I'm evaluating championship teams and championship contenders, those are one of the main factors I put in. Also, Jermaine Samuels, that was the best game he had all year. His dunks are just the best way to get hyped up in the middle of the game, and I feel like him throwing down those couple big-time dunks really provided Villanova with some momentum in a game where, to be honest, I'm not necessarily sure if they had all of it. And also Caleb Daniels, he's still finding his footing, but he's simply unreal when it comes to scoring on most nights. He's going to be another guy, I think, for this Villanova team that's going to be able to contribute for basically most nights every season. And I feel like when you're a team like Villanova that's just super deep, that a lot of times is going to be your best bet to win, just night in and night out, along with your two consistent guys, Gillespie and Robinson-Earl. Just find guys around them who are ready to step up. Cole Swider was also super impressive in this game for Villanova, and I totally understand that he is not the best defensive player in the world. I think his defense is going to have to get better if he wants to make a statement by just staying on the floor for this Villanova team and getting himself on the floor. But at the same time, I do think he did provide himself as a guy that could really help this Villanova team in a specific role, just coming off the bench, knocking down threes. And I feel like when you look at this Villanova team, they are a team with a very high ceiling because of how deep they are, and that is something that not a lot of other teams in college basketball could say about themselves. The other thing is that Villanova played a very slow pace in this game, and I do remember Jay Wright saying how this year's team had the talent and skill to play an up-tempo game, And I feel like when we looked at this Villanova team, especially yesterday against Texas, that wasn't the case. And I feel like that could have been one of the main reasons why the Longhorns were in this game, from start to finish. Frank Fraschilla said it on the broadcast that going into the second half, he thought Villanova had just a tad of an offensive advantage, and ultimately he was right, just because when you looked at what happened in the game, you could see Villanova's players were just a tad more skilled, and the main reason how Texas was going to win this game was based on their length and athleticism. And I do feel like for a little bit in this game, they did a good job at least limiting what Villanova was going to be able to do. That's a really interesting clash of matchup styles of basketball, and I do think it was fascinating how Villanova was able to get the job done yesterday and really adapt to the kind of length that Texas was putting on them. But I'm going to be very curious to see what exactly Villanova could do over the next couple weeks, and at the same time, Villanova is a team that right now I have number 3 in the country. I totally understand they took that hard loss to Virginia Tech, and at the same time, though, when I do my top 25, I do combine it with, some eye test, some resume. And right now, the bottom line is, I don't necessarily know how many teams right now on a neutral floor I would pick to beat Villanova. That's how dynamic their roster is. That's how deep their roster is. That's how well coached they are. And I do think the night against Virginia Tech, it happens. I do think this year, especially in 2020, we're going to be seeing so many teams just take a couple bad losses that ultimately, to start off, we didn't necessarily to expect. We've seen that with Kentucky, and the bottom line is Villanova, them losing this game, them losing that game to Virginia Tech, and I don't want to say the media not caring about it, but I feel like they haven't made that big of a deal about it compared to some of the other Villanova teams in the past that have taken some frustrating non-conference losses, especially that was prior to them when they won their national championships. But I do feel like a lot of people will say, oh, Villanova's fraud, and you can't be losing to Virginia Tech. How could you have them at number 3? I just trust Jay Wright, and I think their personnel is built perfectly for the scheme and the execution that they want to do. Having a point guard in Colin Gillespie, the master of the ball fakes, who could really find shooters like Moore and Samuels and Swider, that's been phenomenal. Obviously, having Robinson Earl has really helped, and it hasn't really looked like Villanova has missed Sadiq Bey that much, which is a great sign. And I do think Jay Wright did a really nice job really building this roster as with likely guys to could replace Sadiq Bey. Cole Swider hasn't necessarily gotten there yet 100%, but you could see that his offense is right on par. I think if he could improve his defense a little bit, he'll get himself to a consistent role on the floor. And I like what I've been seeing from Caleb Daniels. He obviously wasn't great against Texas, but he's been good basically every other game. Jermaine Samuels was very good in this game, really provided the Villanova Wildcats with some nice energy. So I was impressed with what I saw from Villanova. I think they're a top 5 team in the country, and for now, they are still my definite pick to win the Big East.